Wow, man. That's some heavy
Stop.
shit, man.
Why does my engine smoke? Okay, so let's go through some points here. I have 7 of them. Not a long video. First point, overfilling the crankcase with oil. If you happen to do this, you're going to end up with probably a lot of blue smoke and most likely white smoke. We'll explain that a little bit more as we go through the video. Number 2, incorrect oil grade. Now, most small engines take 10W30, but check your manual. But if you're using something different, if you're using the wrong oil, maybe for the temperature, etc., it might become, say, too thin, which it will force oil up into the piston area or cylinder area, and you're going to most likely get a blue smoke. Same with if the oil is too thick, it's not going to circulate properly. Excessive pressures might happen. Going to get some smoke. Number 3, operating the engine on hills or slopes or tilting the engine. Very common would be tilting the engine, especially with lawnmowers. People might want to clean out underneath or inspect the blades or change the blades. What I can suggest here, if you are going to tilt your lawnmower, tilt it the opposite side of the carburetor, or oil will actually run out of the carburetor and make a mess. But if that does happen, just get it going, burn the oil out, and go back and check the oil level after that, because it's probably going to be low. Number 4, plugged crankcase breather. This is something you're going to have to look up in a manual. Look on the internet. Look online, you can find manuals for most engines on there. And the crankcase breather is usually located around the carburetor, but again, do some investigation. Number 5, a little more serious, a blown head gasket. What happens in this situation? The head gasket might have a flaw in it or a piece of it's missing, and that allows oil to go directly from the basically like the crankcase or where the oil is held right directly up into the cylinder and the piston, and you're going to most likely get a very white smoke out of that one. Number 6, worn cylinder and or rings. Now, commonly, believe it or not, this is caused by not changing your oil. Your oil does get dirty, and there's little pieces that break off, metal filings, and if you don't clean your oil at least once a year, these objects or contamination, whatever you want to call it, they're going to scratch up the cylinder walls, going to damage the rings of the piston. It's going to allow oil to go up into the combustion chamber, and most likely in this case it's going to be blue smoke unless it's in really bad shape. But again, change your oil, and importantly also don't operate an engine without an air filter on it, because with no air filter, it's going to suck in dirt, and that dirt is just like sandpaper to an engine, and it's going to ruin the engine and cause this, it's going to wear it out. It's going to be smoking. Simple as that. Number 7 here, a carburetor issue. This one's a little bit different because you're going to see black smoke in this case. Too much fuel is entering the combustion chamber. The fuel's not being burnt properly. Very inefficient, and it's going to make black smoke. Now, a common issue is a stuck choke, or probably even more common is that the person that started the engine forgot to turn the choke off. So make sure the choke is off and you should be good to go. So anyways, these are the most common issues, the 7 points I just went through. So research each one of those, because there are many great videos on the internet, on the YouTube, that will help you out in these situations. And coming up here, a short video, an explanation of what inspired me to make this video, because I've had operated all these small engines for years and years and years. And you know what? I started my rototiller up in the spring here. I changed the oil in the fall, started it up, and it was just smoking like crazy. And I'm like, this has never happened to me before. And I'm like, oh no, I thought the worst situation. And then I'm thinking about dollar signs. Oh, because you know what? Some of these things are not cheap to buy or repair, especially if you have someone else repair them. So I ran into this situation where this is just a simple standard small engine, very common on, this is on a rototiller, lawnmowers, maybe some small lawn tractors, but they usually have a bigger engine. But anyways, you get the general idea. Very standard setup. And the problem I had is I started up and it was smoking like crazy, like unbelievable amount of smoke. And before I put it away last year, as I always do, I changed the oil, and I just did that, and I just rolled it into the shed and put it away. Never really looked at it again. And I'm gonna have to admit that, I don't know if I completely made an error, but most people think the worst situation has happened. It's smoke coming out. All kinds of videos on the internet. Could be the head gasket, which is a very possible thing. Has a flaw in it and it's allowing oil to get up into the cylinder. That's what I thought it was, and I was thinking, oh, that's going to be a pain. But you know what? Sometimes you have to look at the most simple things, because I don't believe this was entirely my doing, but first of all, check the oil and make sure that it's not over full. And oddly, this one is very sensitive to the amount of oil that's in it. I know you can't, if I clean that off. Basically, when I checked it, so there's the little marking for high and low, and it was only a little bit high. It shouldn't have been a big deal, but it was, and that caused oil to get pushed up into the cylinder, smoke like crazy. So this dipstick is maybe a little, it's somewhat accurate, but I found out I need to be a little bit actually below this high dot on this thing for it to work properly. And how I verified that, and this is how I'm going to change the oil in the future too, on all these engines, and hopefully this is accessible for yours. There's always this lower fill. A lot of engines don't have a dipstick, they just have this lower fill thing. There's a drain plug way down here, so you can drain it through there. That's fine. But when you go to fill it up, if it has a dipstick up here, what I suggest is unscrewing this after you drain the oil, unscrew this, and then start filling the oil from up here until the oil starts to come out of the lower fill, and it should be sitting on the threads. And once you turn that in, let it sit for a while, go back and check the dipstick, and that's going to tell you for the future exactly when this thing is right full on that dipstick. Like, you'll have a comparison, because this is the best way to know if it's right full, because the oil should not just be pouring out of here, it should just be sitting in there on the threads down below here. So if you have this out, when you fill it, you're going to get the exact amount of oil that's required in your engine, and then just reference what it says on the dipstick for future. And the other thing that I came across, now the carburetor was a little bit dirty on this one, so I did have to clean it a bit. But sometimes out of the factory, the carburetors are set for certain atmospheric pressures. And one thing that I found with this one, so here's the choke. Normally you have it all the way on when you start it. A little bit of gas on, you start it up, get it running, and then you pull this back. Turn the choke off once it gets going. And when I found it, this thing always ran a little bit, it didn't run perfectly. Like, it always had some, like it sounded like it was backfiring or struggling a little bit. And really, all I ended up doing, while I have it set at full power, I just fine-tuned this, because depending on how, if the carburetor might be a little bit plugged, the jet, or it was set for a certain atmospheric pressure. Now I'm very low, close to sea level where I am now, and I think this one thing was set for like a standard, like a 2,000 feet or something for altitude. And so what was happening is that basically the amount of fuel that was going in was not in a proper ratio for the amount of air that was going in. So I believe it was getting too little fuel through the jet for the amount of air pressure, since I think it was set for a higher altitude. And so how you remedy that, in some cases, not all, but when it's going, if you start closing off that throttle a little bit, it's going to start running better. And you have to be very careful, take your time. You're going to eventually find a setting where it starts running really good. And basically what you've done is you've adjusted the fuel air mixture. Just a little tip, but that's what I've experienced. I think the carb's pretty clean, and it's always kind of has been like this with this one, but that's the explanation, the fuel air mixture. But there you have it. I was thinking I had to go take it to the shop or take it apart myself and put a new gasket in there and all that stuff. Just turns out just a tiny bit high on the fuel, on the oil level. So check that first before you get into any major stuff. And a lot of guys make videos about how to clean out your carburetor and taking this engine apart. I haven't had to take the engine apart. I would do that for you, but I'm not going to because I don't have to. But that's my point, or my tips for today. So there you have it. Enjoy. Come back, subscribe for more. Check it out. That could be your issue. Could be simple. I hadn't seen a video really saying this before. It's always been, oh, there's a major issue, but mine wasn't. Maybe yours isn't either. So look into it. Have a good day.